Hello, everybody, and welcome to this year's World Product Day. Well, I should
Welcome.
rather welcome. Hello. Actually, I should rather say welcome to one of over 90 events, which together make this the World Product Day. Actually, as you can see, the slide was done 2 days ago, so a few events were added since then. Overall, World Product Day already started 17 hours ago in Auckland, New Zealand, with a talk by John Cutler, and it will finish 9 hours from now in Portland, Oregon. And all the little Venn diagrams that you see on the map in the background, they indicate local product tanks. And many of them are hosting events today. And this event is actually represented by two Venn diagrams on the map. Because this event is a joint effort by the teams from ProductTank Barcelona and the ProductTank Hamburg. And each of the team is represented by two members today who help to run the show. So from Barcelona, we have Guido and Alex, who are both senior product managers at N26. And from Hamburg, we have Anja, who's a senior product manager at Semasio, and myself, I'm a product director at Zing. Before we start today's talk, let me take you back in time and explain a little bit why we can all be here today. Because 10 years ago, product was a lonely job. And it was in a different state than it is today. There were already people doing the job. And for instance, Marty Kagan's book, Inspired, was out already. But what was missing was a community to connect the people working in product. And that's why Martin Eriksson, who is on this call, by the way, hello, Martin, actually brought his friends that he knew in product in London together for the very first ProductTank meetup, which happened in the back room of a pub in London. And shortly after, Martin, together with Jana Basto and Simon Cast, founded Mind the Product, which over the years turned from a hobby to an actual company. And if you reflect where we are today in product management, 10 years later, I think you will agree that it's less lonely. Product management has become a sought-after role in all tech companies worldwide. And since most companies these days are tech companies, we're talking about a lot of companies, a lot of product managers, and they are no longer alone. Because thanks to Mind the Product and many local product tank organizers around the world, there now is a community that connects over 200,000 people across more than 200 cities. For these product tank meetups that happen. And also every year, there are 5 annual conferences organized by Mind the Product, happening in Manchester, San Francisco, London, Singapore, and the beautiful city of Hamburg. And as you can imagine, this is the one I'm particularly proud about. So we put Hamburg on this map. Unfortunately, as you know, this year we had to cancel the event, but we'll be back next year with an even better conference. But let's get back to more pleasant topics. Because Mind the Product not only organizes conferences and is behind ProductTank, Mind the Product also has a great product blog. And just recently, Mind the Product introduced membership programs for product managers and a dedicated one for product leaders. And these programs will give them access to exclusive content and also offer new opportunities for them to interact with the smartest mind in product management. In any case, as you can see, there are now a lot of things to choose from to grow as a product manager and to meet like-minded product managers. As Martin Eriksson used to say in his opening words to MTP conference, this is your tribe. And we are happy that you are here with us today. Of course, you can also become an active part of this. You can share what you've learned by speaking at one of the ProductTank events. There are some that are pretty big and maybe not the best thing to start if this is your first talk, but there are also many of them which have smaller audience. So they're really a good opportunity to get into public speaking. You can also write for the MTP blog, or with your company, you can also host your local ProductTank meetup and in this way support the local community. Today, in order to get back to today's event, it's a special day. because already for several years, World Product Day has been the anniversary celebration of ProductTank. But this year it's special because it's the 10th anniversary. So we're now 10 years after the very first ProductTank happened in London. And this made us really curious how it was back then, just in a small pub, just a few people. And I'm very happy now to introduce Mark, who's also an organizer of ProductTank Hamburg, and who was at the first ever ProductTank in the world in London. Actually, as a matter of fact, Mark was also at the first ever ProductTank in Barcelona and also at the first ever ProductTank in Hamburg, but that's a different story. Mark currently works as a group product manager at Yelp's Hamburg office. And I'm very glad about the opportunity to ask you a few questions, Mark, now, so that we can all get a feeling for how it was back then. So first of all, how are you doing, Mark?
Locked down, I guess, like most of us, and getting a bit sick of it.
I can imagine. So Mark, 10 years ago, you were among the 29 or so people, at least 29 is what it says on the meetup page, who attended the first ever ProductTank in a bar called Ruby Blue. Maybe the blue is also no coincidence, I don't know. What was it like back then?
Well, I guess the first thing was it didn't seem like such a big milestone then, but it was just this meetup where everyone was pretty curious. Like you said, the whole thing was very, very early days, so it felt very niche, a bit undergroundy. I mean, I think the back room of the pub was actually downstairs, and the group was really all the early adopters. It was just a few people that were interested in this topic, and no one knew where this was going to go. So it just felt really exploratory.
And what role did ProductTank play for you in those early days?
So Martin and I basically we were both experimenting with, like, how do we increase networking, and how do we share our knowledge and our experiences. And Martin started with ProductTank, exceptionally more successful than what I tried. But we had another thing going where a smaller group would meet, and it was more of a discussion. And I think that was also part of the whole vibe. Like, there was lots of exploration and there was lots of trying stuff out. So ProductTank was one of the things that was being tried out. Many people weren't in any kind of network. But at the time in London, it was Martin doing ProductTank, and I was doing a few sessions of this product forum or product roundtable or something I called it. But yeah, that was the context.
And how do you feel about the way this all has evolved and that you've witnessed over the last 10 years?
Well, I just feel like right now there's like this huge support network, right? Like, Martin's managed to create this huge network where I think anyone who's new to product really has a place to go. And there are all these facets that you just explained of how to engage. And there's so many resources that you can now tap into. And it feels much less like you're lost in space and you just have to kind of do it all by yourself. But it feels much more like there's a community that you can rely on.
Yeah, this is also one aspect that I really like, this whole like feeling that there is a community and there are many things that you can do to interact with it. So thank you very much, Mark, for sharing these experiences from back then. And now actually it's really time for our talks of tonight. And we have quite a global lineup for today. So we actually have presenters dialing in from Mexico, from the Netherlands, and from Spain. And to introduce you to our very first speaker, I hand over to Anja.
Thanks, Arne. And yeah, great introduction. And thanks, Mark, for joining and sharing those views of the past with us. So yeah, as Arne said, celebrating the Global World Product Day, and therefore we're very proud to have very international speakers here today. Our first speaker, Nacho Vassimo, comes from Argentina, as you said, but will present for you today from Mexico. This is where he works as CPO at Best Day. Nacho is leading product teams for more than 10 years now. But he's not only an experienced product leader, speaker, and coach. No, he also founded the ProductTanks in Buenos Aires and later in Cancun to make this awesome community even better. Thanks for that, Nacho. Today, he will share some concrete tools to help this global product pack to do product strategy right. But no superficial advice, but substantial guidance on how to create the right strategy for your product. Please give Nacho a big virtual hand.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm really happy to be here to talk about product strategy. Thank you, organizers, for having me. And today I want to cover actually two problems. The first one is that most companies' product strategies are less than ideal. And at first I thought this was a biased opinion I had based on the people I talk with or the companies I work for. But recently, Marty Kagan wrote a few articles on product strategy, and he basically said the same. He has a very broad view of product companies, so I think we are safe to say this is a problem many companies struggle with. And the second problem is that I found that most available material for creating product strategy is rather superficial. So I want to get out of this buzzword and give you some model to think about, some tools to actually be able to do it tomorrow at your office or at your home probably today, but actually it's something that you can act upon. Anya already introduced me. I've been working in product management for 3 years. I'm currently Chief Product Officer at Best Day, which is the largest travel company in Mexico. Not the best industry to be at this moment, but I'm really passionate about learning and sharing experiences and growing the product community. So I'll be more than happy to connect in any product tank related topics or anything, any way you feel I can help. Going back to our talk today, why most product strategies are less than ideal. Let me tell you that with a very brief personal story, a bit exaggerated to make a point. But when I joined the company I'm working for, the first year, the product leadership team decided that was a foundational year. We were not a product-led company yet, so we wanted to really focus on the structure, the best practices, the product processes that were not there yet. So we set aside product strategy for some time, and teams kept doing what they were doing before, and you can think about a feature factory model in which they were getting requirements from the business. By the end of the year, we were kind of successful in making this foundational implementation. We were ready to create our first product strategy, but we realized that we have a huge problem in our underlying technology. So we were having huge infrastructure costs. We were having outages and very high lag times. So the user experience was being badly impacted, and also the business. So what we did is, with a handful of people, a handful of leaders, we joined in a room and we decided what we needed to do exactly with the features we wanted to build, by when, and who will make them. So in that way, we had a strategy, but the teams did not have any strategic context. We were kind of the owners of the shows, and we were executing more in a command and control kind of way. By the end of the year, we were kind of successful in that implementation without autonomous product teams, but actually we made some progress. And by the end of the year, we decided that we were in shape now to create a strategy. Not sure if a beautiful defined strategy, but at least a strategy using the tools and models we'll see today. The problem is that if you think that culture can eat strategy for breakfast, pandemics are much better at it. So our strategy went down the toilet this year, but that's for another talk. Going back to the user problems companies face when creating product strategy, the first one is using excuses for not defining it, and that's probably the most recurring excuse of all. I told you what will happen with us in our first year. We decided to set it aside, and that was a mistake. If we had introduced a product strategy, our foundational work would have had a much better impact. And also, other companies said, okay, we have the strategy in our heads, we don't need to put it in paper, or we are in a very early stage, so we don't want to commit for a long term. All of those are excuses that will limit your ability to execute on that strategy, on that direction. The second problem is purely communicated strategy, and that's what we did in our second year. So in terms of the ability to have autonomous product teams with strategic context to decide, a purely communicated strategy is almost as bad as non-existing one. So also a big recurring problem. We also have companies that focus too much on the short term, so they work on quarterly goals and avoid the effort of making a long-term commitment. And my personal favorite is the wrong flight level, those companies who say, okay, our strategy is to expand internationally. So you have this kind of ambition, this kind of high-level goal, but that kind of goal doesn't give the teams any strategic context to make proper decisions on how to achieve those goals. On the other side of the spectrum, you have those CEOs that come to the product team and give them the list of 40 strategic projects they want completed this year. And of course, that goes back to the feature factory and not having autonomous teams that can innovate. So I hope that that made clear that there are many reasons not to have a strategy, but if so many companies are struggling with that, why should we care? The short answer is that the strategy is the link from vision to action. So if you don't have a strategy and you have a vision that you want to achieve, probably your actions will not lead you there or will not have the impact they could have if you have a proper strategy. And said another way, if you are constantly defining goals and assigning resources without a strategy, you will be chasing the new shiny object quarter by quarter instead of committing to a proper longer-term direction. Let me tell you 3 benefits I found of implementing product strategy, and not only from my experience, from many companies. The first one is alignment. So as I was saying, if you give a vision to teams, they will try to achieve it in whatever direction they seem that is the best. And that will probably make sense, that there will be valid directions. But if one team is going in one direction and the other team is going in another direction, the overall impact you can achieve is reduced. So instead, if you select a path that you want to follow, teams will be able to make decisions on their own. They will be autonomous, but they will make those decisions in the same direction. So what one team is doing will not only benefit or achieve the goals that that team has for itself, but also move other teams farther in the direction they're achieving, and the overall results for the company will be much better. The second benefit is not only that for alignment for product teams, but also for the entire organization. So for instance, stakeholders will use that focus to ask or request things that are inside your sphere of action or your selected direction. And also other teams will be able to collaborate. For instance, if you are selected positioning and a particular product direction, the marketing team will be able to craft a message that supports that direction and conveys the value you want to bring to the table. And also, for instance, the operation teams will create processes that support that value you want to create for the user. And last but not least, you also will gain, when you scale, this problem becomes more critical. So having the consistency and the vision to maintain that direction at scale is much more important. I hope that allows us to see that it's very important to create a good product strategy. But as I said, I want to get out from this buzzword and get to actionable steps. And I have 2 disclaimers to make here. The first one is that this is a model, and as a model, all of them are wrong. I hope that you find some of it useful and you can think about it and adapt it to your own context. And the second one is that I cannot explain product strategy process in 10 minutes without being superficial, but this is what I'm trying to avoid. So I will jump into the first step, the generate insight step, because it's the first one, so it's logical to start there, but also because I think it's the one with the higher level of abstraction or most superficial of them all in terms of tools and advices. So in summary, the process I propose is very simple. The first one is generating those insights, then selecting among them, and finally doing a synthesis that makes it easy for communication. Let's jump to it. But before starting generating the insights, there is one part of the puzzle that I do not call the step, because I hope that you are constantly gathering information. So you will be constantly interviewing users or experimenting to find some new insights about the customer behavior. You will be checking the customer satisfaction scores. You will look into your own product analytics data, the overall company results. You will be looking into the market and tendencies and new industry reports and benchmark out other competitors. So you will be constantly doing this work, and it is a good idea to pause before jumping into the strategy creation process and kind of doing a summary of probably the latest news or the most relevant information you can gather. But it's something that you can do continually, and you will continue doing after you select your strategy. So it's not kind of this waterfall process. So jumping into the insights phase, sometimes I feel that insights, it's kind of this big word, and we imagine the kind of ideas that only Steve Jobs may have, or that eureka moment that Einstein had with the apple. And I do not believe that's the case. I think that insights are basically learnings. It's identification of a problem, a tendency, or opportunity that, if we act upon it, can radically change the result of the product or the company. And if you look closely into that, it's very similar to what you are doing when you are doing discovery with your teams. The discovery work is this kind of learning to see if a problem is relevant, if the solution we are trying to see is the real opportunity we want to pursue. And when you're doing discovery, you're focused on one area. When you're doing strategy, you have a broader view, but in essence, it's the same kind of learning. And again, it would be naive to expect to sit down one day to define the strategy and come up with tons of insights. So what we are doing in this step actually is bringing all that information that we kind of gathered in the past, we didn't act upon, and kind of organizing it and see which is the most relevant one. So again, it's not a waterfall process, it's something that's ongoing. And why insights? Because if you are going to invest all of these company resources into one direction, if you do not use insights, you are simply following a hunch, and you are reducing the chances that that direction will be successful. So if you want to keep your shop, it's probably a good idea to have insights and decide on a strategy based on that. So let's jump to tools. As I said, tools will help you organize your thoughts. And I have 4 tools. Today I will cover only the first 2 because of the time we have with some examples. And let's jump to the first one. This tool is from the book Blue Ocean Strategy. And what it basically proposes is to dissect your core value proposition in the attributes that your customers value the most, or the most relevant attributes of the value proposition, and compare them with your key competitors. And then use a technique called eliminate, reduce, raise, and create. You can eliminate or reduce those attributes in which you are investing money, but the customers that do not value them that much. So you can reduce that investment to put it elsewhere. And that elsewhere is the attributes that you want to raise or create in order to capture a new niche or to increase your market share against your competitor. So in our case, one of our business units, the DMC, is called Destination Management Company, is the type of service in which you receive passengers in an airport and transport them to a hotel. And in the hotel, you will offer them someone available for any question they may have, but that someone will actually sell them activities in that destination. That's very usually in the Caribbean and all-inclusive hotels. And we were facing a challenge because new apps like Get Your Guide were taking some market share and some relevance. So what we wanted to compare were 2 key attributes. One was comfort, and the other was personalization. Why comfort? Because people with the apps were being able to, with a few taps, purchase an activity, and we were forcing a human-to-human interaction. So we were not being that comfortable in the experience. And then in terms of personalization, we have a really valuable asset because this sales representative knew all the activities in the destination, and upon seeing you, they can get your profile and really give you that insight of activities you will value the most. So we wanted to keep that personalization and increase the comfort in the experience. So with this visualization, we were able to select something that will impact that kind of direction. Second tool, the opportunity solution tree. I hope that you know this tree is introduced by Teresa Torres. It's very useful to organize the product discovery work. And how can we use it for insights during the strategy process? So the main, or not the main probably, but a very useful part of the tree is being able to see other opportunities instead of running with the first one that comes to your mind. So in our case, we had a desired outcome that was reduce the operation cost per sale. We had was higher than the industry standard, so we wanted to reduce it. And the first idea we had with the team was focused on the manual processes we had to fulfill sales. So after the user clicked the purchase button, we had a lot of manual tasks that some people were doing. So we thought that if we automate that, we will reduce all those people doing that work and we will reduce the cost. we said, okay, let's wait a minute and let's see other opportunities. And what we realized was that that type of operation was really short, and the team doing it was really small. So if we had run after that opportunity, the impact in the operation cost would have been really small. And instead, we saw that the amount of service calls we are having, the contact rate per sale, was really high. So we focused on that. And we did exactly the same. In the second layer, we said, okay, if a lot of people is calling us for service calls, let's build a self-service platform in which users can do their cancellations or modifications. And we realized, upon saying, okay, wait a minute, and let's see other options, that a lot of those calls were to get more information. So the baggage allowance of the flight or the size of the pool in the hotel. So if we have run with that, we will, with the self-service platform, we will have invested a lot of effort in something that it was not tackling the 70% call problem that we have. And simply by improving the information in the flow and in the voucher, we had a pretty high impact. To summarize the last two tools, the Horizon of McKinsey, I think that as product teams, we have a higher responsibility than the rest of the organization in making sure that we are building that growth, that new revenues that we'll have in the future. So if you are seeing all your insights and everything is focused on the Horizon 1, you should make sure that you are investing some time in bets for future time horizons. And the last one is the Innovation Matrix by Lego. That's a very interesting tool. They basically define 8 categories of possible innovations, and they go outside product, like, for instance, the business model or the marketing channels. And they have 3 layers. The first one will be incremental improvements, a new offering, or redefining completely a category. So by looking at all these options, you will probably be able to think outside of your normal comfort zone and have ideas that go beyond what you will normally think. So it's a great idea to spark some innovation there. So as I said, I will not cover the following steps. Select, the importance of Select is that it's not only using a prioritization tool to select the most relevant information, is to actually putting things together to push in the same direction, how the insights you have can move together. And there are actually tools to do that as well. And finally, Synthesis, that is making this information available for communication. And the best analogy I can come up with is how Picasso drew this bull. And actually, if you see the first drawings, he starts by adding more detail. And what you do during the strategy process is similar. You add more information, you add more insights, you analyze all the numbers, and you try to understand very, very detailed picture to make a great selection. But once you make that selection, in order to communicate it, you need to start removing pieces and get to communication with very few lines to make it memorable, but keeping the essence of the strategy you are trying to follow. That's it, to keep it short. As I said, I did not explain everything, so I want to leave you with some resources to go deeper into this information if you require it. The first one is a summary article on Medium that goes through all the steps with the tools for selection and synthesis, so I hope you find it useful. And if the moderators can please help me with the link, I think in the chat we can post it. And the second one is probably too soon to tell, but I'm working on a book that talks about the process of creating a strategy, linking to roadmap and OKRs. It's called Product Direction. The draft is the manuscript is not ready yet, so it's very experimental. But I will really appreciate if you are facing these challenges and you can give me any feedback on what I'm writing. There's a free section available that you can read. And as I said, I'm experimenting with this, so I will really love to understand if this is valuable for you all. Finally, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is by a book by Richard Rummelt. Is one of the only resources that is not superficial about the strategy, so I really recommend it. And some articles by Gibson Biddle and Marty Kahn, which are very useful as well. And that's it for me. As probably we all say, there is one more thing. This format is very weird, and I cannot say if you are enjoying it or hating it or just bored. So if you can take 1 minute, literally is 1 minute, to scan that QR code, or if the moderators can help you with the link in the chat and fill a 1 minute survey, it will mean a lot to me, because I will be able to understand how it went and how we can improve this communication. So thank you very much for your time, and that's it. I think back to you, Anya.
Thanks, Nacho. This was very insightful, and At least I liked it, and I'm pretty sure everybody else did as well. And guys, if you're not following Nacho on Medium, you're really missing out. Please keep in mind, everyone, post your questions during the talks in the chat, and at the end of all the talks, we're going to do a big Q&A session. Our next speaker brings us back from America to Europe. Thomas Leitermann actually lived for 2 years in Hamburg, where I'm from, while he was working here as a product manager for Eventim. But can you imagine that he never made it to a ProductTank here? Only when moving to the south of Germany, he recognized that he really missed out. But from that point on, he was unstoppable. He co-founded a tank in Karlsruhe, and now, after his move to Amsterdam, he also supports the team there. Good job. From his experience at Innovex and DAZN, Thomas is very eager to share his learnings from learning. Why should someone make his mistakes again? Here are his thoughts about what are the right tools and methods for your product discoveries, and he's very passionate to make clear experimentation is more than A/B testing. Please give a warm welcome, everyone, to Thomas.
Thank you, Anja. Thank you very much. I'm just going to take these off so it sounds a little bit more natural. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. As Anja said, this talk is based on my previous experience with a company called Innovex, where I did a lot of product discovery, which was mainly about finding new product and business ideas and validating them, evaluating them. But I also sort of expanded it a little bit and taken some of my experience that I have with DAZN as well. And I'm just going to have to do a quick tech check, so I'm not on mute. So we're making sure that that part is still working. Yeah, that looks good. I can see myself. Okay, here we go. So what I want to do today, as Anja already mentioned, I want to help you navigate the tool jungle and a little bit the method jungle as well, I would say. And my goal is to help you see the variety of methods, experimentation methods and approaches that are available, and also how easy it is to get started within the current tool jungle. So maybe to start out, a bit of a quick question. I think it's currently the most commonly form of experimentation, which are A/B tests. So who here has run an A/B test in the last month? And by run, I mean was involved with. And if you want, you can also, besides just saying +1, maybe you want to give the number you have as well, so we can see if it's actually as prevalent as we all think it is. Just going to have a quick look into the YouTube chat. Oh, I can see a lot of questions, a lot of comments. That's great. Perfect. So just keep them coming. So if we, 4, that's good. Alex, put some. Nice. I can see them coming in. So I think it's actually safe to say it's sometimes seen as like the gold standard in the product management world today, right? And if you look into things, if you do like a quick Google, I just did a couple of days ago, you get like 855 million hits. And even if you combine it with product management, it's still a 750 million hits. So it's really big topic. And you look a bit outside, you even have like the big guns like Harvard Business Review making it a cover story, probably with the poster child of A/B testing as the story about Booking.com. And when you look into a bit of the data and you try to find something out, you probably land on a page from Optimizely, which is one of the big providers. And I mean, there you have it, right? If you look at it, with A/B testing, you make 3,500 more revenue. I mean, you must be stupid not to do it, right? So clearly, it's the answer to everything, right? It solves all of our problems. I would actually argue not so fast. There are a couple of things that I see. But let's first look at what is an A/B test actually, right? Well, if we take a step back, what does it actually mean? And don't worry, it's not a talk about A/B tests. I'm still going to talk about experimentation, but let's look at it first, right? What does it actually mean? It's pitting the current solution for something that we have versus a new solution. Well, if you look at it, first it's a test that we're doing, right? So it's automated, It needs to run automated. We need to have the infrastructure for it. It needs to happen without human supervision or interaction, which means we also need to think about all the edge cases and the difficulty. We need to think them through because we can't touch it, right? And then the other thing is also it's a new solution. So basically we're building something new, which also means we need to discuss it with everybody. We need to think it through. We need to get everybody's agreements. We need to build it, which means we need to get design involved. We need to get the developers involved. We sometimes need to get legal involved. So in essence, it's a lot of effort. And if we look at it, building is the most expensive way of testing something, right? Especially building it so that it can run by itself and cover all the variety that we currently have in the product. So I would actually say A/B testing, it's quite expensive. And then there's also another part, right? A/B testing is an experimentation method, but I would argue it's definitely not all of the experimentation methods that we have at our disposal to learn about products and to learn about features that we want to develop or think we need to develop. So if we look out, we already said, so A/B test is testing solutions. So when we look at the goal that we try to do with it is we want to evaluate and validate options that we have, right? And one option is packaged into a solution in an A/B test, but that's not really all that we have, right? If we look into, now we have a product part, but there's also a market side where we want to maybe focus on revenue. Can we make money off of this? And now here we have evaluating questions. There are also only what questions, but what about all these why questions? What if our goal is to discover and generate new options and actually understand the why behind it? So there are a lot more focuses that we can find or that we can focus on and understand. So what are the type of questions that we can answer with focusing on these different areas? Let's dive a bit deeper into those. So I already mentioned when we look into our goal is evaluating, validating, which usually means focusing on a solution. We have questions like, does it work? What do customers like? And then probably the one A/B testing question, which solution works better? And then better is defined by what the company thinks is better. Often it's conversion rate. But as I said, there are other focuses that we have. So let's stick with evaluating and validating, but focusing more on the market side with revenue, where we have questions like, are customers willing to pay? Are they willing to pay more for something different, which then probably could be set up in an A/B test. But again, we're asking what questions. But now if we look into the why questions, and for example, on the product level, we could focus on the problem. How do we create value for the customer? What does the customer actually perceive as value? And what form does it take? How do we solve this problem? And maybe what is the minimal feature set? And then also looking at the market, who is our customer? What are their pains and gains? What do they need done? For which solution are they willing to pay or willing to pay more? These are a complete different type of questions, and usually the type of questions that we sometimes tend to glance over, if we're honest, right? We just want to, I thought it all out, let's just get the solution. And now, if we know what type of question we have, then we can put that back into the focuses that we have, and then we can turn the page, so to say, and say, okay, let's actually look at the methods that we have. So for example, when we're talking about solutions, then yes, we have A/B tests, but there are also other ones that are quicker and easier to do, I'd argue. But there are also a whole host of other methods that we can use. Solution interviews, concierge tests, discovery interviews, landing page tests. So there's a whole area that we can use once we know what actually our goal and focus is. So to summarize about A/B testing, why I'd argue it's not the only thing that we should do is it usually requires a new solution to be built, but building is the most expensive way of testing something, especially building it completely. And A/B testing helps us evaluate options, sort of answering the what question, but it doesn't really help us with the why questions. Now, how do I actually come to the point where I can decide if an A/B test is valid? Now, something that was very helpful for me in the past is a structure that I'm using a lot is called the test card. Basically, it's 4 questions, and yes, it can take the form of a card. Sometimes I use an Excel sheet, But the important thing is we start out with an assumption and we transform that into an hypothesis, right? Usually we start out with the most riskiest assumption. So what needs to be true so that the outputs result in the desired outcomes that we want to have. It could be from the business model canvas, you're thinking about a whole new product idea, but it could also come from a lean UX canvas. For example, if you're thinking about it more like a feature. Now, depending on the type of question or focus of the assumption, we can then go back to this matrix that I just shared and say, okay, where's the focus of this? Where's the focus of this assumption? And then we can say, okay, now what is actually the experiment method, the type of test that we can run, right? And we're also not running experiments just for the sake of running them. We're also running them to measure something and to prove and disprove the hypotheses, and we do that by measuring something. So we need to have some measurement in place, and obviously we need to know when we are right or when we are wrong, and hopefully we do that before. That was another learning that we had is, well, let's just measure something. We don't know what actually success is. Let's just get started and then we'll see how it goes. Well, and then you fall prey to confirmation bias and you end up sort of saying, yeah, that's actually what we expected. So let's look at an example of something that I've worked on. My previous job, it was an app that could help you read and understand your plant. And we had like an online course that you could sort of go through. And we wanted to see if people were willing to pay for it, right? So this is a revenue question in the market. Are people willing to pay for it? So what we did is we had a landing page test with a paywall inserted, right? So we gave people a test after a few sample questions, and then they asked them to pay. And we measured the conversion rate, how many people actually were willing to pay. And as we were a bit in the dark about what's the success criteria, one idea that helped us a lot was sort of splitting it up and saying, we're super happy with this, that would be the best, it would be an absolute success. And we're okay with that conversion rate, and we'll be really disappointed if it's only that. So this is a way that we could sort of arrive and structure our experiment, and also make sure that we actually run the correct experiment method, which might be an A/B test, but maybe it's not the only thing. Now, if we actually look into the tools that we can use to run these experiments, I wanted to share some, so to say, learnings from the shop floor. Now, before we get into this, I just want to do a big shout out and call out to something that some of you might have heard. I think it's a pretty recent development, but I think it's fantastic, and it's a so-called no-code movement. Now, what does it actually mean? No-code is that you can build something quickly and easy without actually writing a line of code. So you can build parts of software products or complete software products actually without actually writing a line of code. This sounds a bit maybe strange in the beginning, so here's an example of probably my favorite no-code app called Zapier. It's a little bit like If This Then That on steroids, if you remember what that was. So you can connect different apps that you have, different applications, and you can make SAPs is what they call it. So for example, you make a sale on Stripe, and then you can actually capture that sale in Google Sheets, and that was Zapier will do. This is one example, but actually there is a whole bunch of tools out there that you can go in, and there are resources, I'll share them at the end, that can help you find these tools. Now, we've used these tools, and we also had some learning with them, so I'm going to share some 3 examples of something to be a little bit aware of. So I mentioned before that we built this app that would help you learn something, and we had like lessons, and the scope of these lessons was questions. So we thought questions, okay, we can use a survey tool, we can use Typeform, which I think is from Barcelona, funny enough, we're based in Barcelona. So we used Typeform, and we said, okay, if you answer this question and you go here, if you answer that, you go here. And we ended up with a massive logic flow, and it was very, very cumbersome to make any changes. And in the end, we found out we actually didn't do what we wanted. So we went down a bit the rabbit hole, then we stepped back and actually said, well, let's just build it as a clickable prototype, but one that is live, right? One that doesn't look like Envision. So we used a tiny app called Card, where we can basically put together a clickable prototype and say, if you click here, go here, if you click here, go here. And we put it live, and it was much quicker and easier. And that, I think, is sort of one of the main learnings, that even if you use no-code tools, you can always make it simpler, and it's always better, mostly because it's faster, and also because you're able to iterate much quicker. And another example, in sort of the same way, is a prototype that we built to test if people would engage with a iPad with a quiz on it when they were waiting in line at the supermarket, right? So yeah, sure, we could have gone away and built that and like all the quizzes and the CMS and whatever. And this is actually what you could do, right? So you could go in and type and we'll just react. I had a couple of questions. And yes, we could have built it with WordPress or whatever else. When we actually did it, it's a lot of PowerPoint slides and model to stitch it together. And it worked. We put it out for a guerrilla test. We were close by. It didn't need to run by itself, but we got a lot of insights from that. So the simpler, the better, faster. And one last example, I'm also going back to the app that we developed at that time, is we used Instagram ads to drive traffic to that, and we had to create videos for that. So you just saw the video as it played. Now, surely we could have gone away, and there are tons of Instagram video builders and video ads builders, but actually what we did, all of that is a PowerPoint animation. And everybody could use that, and we were much quicker to do it. We were much quicker to change things. So takeaways, to summarize, if you want to sort of navigate the tool jungle and sometimes a little bit the experimentation method jungle, I want to call out, please consider A/B testing only as one method of experimentation, because it requires a lot of effort and it only answers the what. So I actually argue, if you think about doing an A/B test, take a step back, think through it, walk backwards and say, what is actually the assumption that we want to look at? And then from that assumption, look at what's the focus of that. Are we actually talking about solution? Do we have enough answers to all the other parts of the equation? Do we know the customer? Do we know the problem? And if not, probably an A/B test is a waste, and you should run a different type of experiment. And if you run that different type of experiment, use no-code stuff. You sort of can start as simple as possible. But also, even then, don't get down the rabbit hole of tools, because that can also happen. But actually try to keep it simple. Those are super helpful, but still try to keep it simple, try to iterate as quickly as possible, and then you'll be able to navigate the tool and the experiment method jungle. That's it from my side. I have a couple of call outs that I want to make. There are a couple of directories for no-code tools. There are 2 fantastic books. Unfortunately, they're always from an angle of startup and product ideas, or even business ideas, like this buddy here, the testing business ideas. I'd actually argue all of that is exactly as applicable to all product managers when we think about features, when you think about what's the next thing that we can do to deliver value. All those things apply, and if we use the methods and ideas and frameworks that are presented in these 2 books, for example, the startup book is for free, by the way, then we're much quicker to come to a solution, and we might not need to run an A/B test for that. That's it. That's me. If you ever answer them, let me know. Let's meet for a coffee. And yeah, now I'm excited to hear the last talk and then for the Q&A.
Thanks, Thomas. Insightful talk, and thanks for the invitation. So yes, don't forget to paste all your questions in the chat, and we're going to answer them after the next talk. Yeah, unfortunately, now we're getting to our last speaker tonight, but I hope you so far enjoyed this international journey. Our next speaker, Sebastián Honores, also got around a lot. Born in Chile, he then studied in Germany and France, and for more than 9 years, he worked in Amsterdam for booking. So maybe he and Thomas might have been to the same meetup before. We're gonna check that later. So since half a year, he joined the product community of Madrid, where he works as product director for Fever. Sebastian started his career as data scientist. and it became part of his DNA. The interaction between data science and product just fascinates him. That's why he has such great insights for you on how to measure success and how to choose the right metrics. Please enjoy, everyone.
Thanks, Anya, for the introduction. And thanks to the ProductTank team for having me here today. Hi, everyone. As you may have seen in the program, we'll be spending the next 15 to 20 minutes speaking about success in products. And the first thing I would like to highlight is the reason why I chose this topic for my talk. In my years of product experience, I've realized that we as PMs spend lots of time looking for ways to improve the experience of our users, which is typically reflected on given KPIs, being conversion, number of downloads, etc., which is normal and expected. But I don't think we spent enough time defining what success actually means. I'm Sebastian Honores, Director of Product at Fever and former product leader at Booking.com, where I have had the chance to work in great products with brilliant people in areas such as marketing, sales, and front-end, always from the product side, of course. And as a fun fact, I started my career as a data scientist. And since the beginning of my career, I have been exploring the intersection between data science and product. In topics such as recommendations and personalization, you could see some of the examples of that in this slide, and also in fundamental topics such as metrics and experimentation. And by doing so, I grew convinced that your measurement of success shapes your product more than any feature you'll ever ship. I'll say it again. Your measurement of success shapes your product more than any feature you'll ever ship. And let me illustrate what I'm saying with an example. In this slide, you see two screens. Both of them are city pages of Fever, the company I work for, which is an online marketplace to discover experiences such as festivals, events, restaurants, etc. So the screen number 1 dates back to 2015, and the number 2 is the current version of Fever. Do you see how different they look? So my question to you is, what do you think changed? Did Fever hire better designers? Or did we get more events to offer? Probably both are true, but the answer is a bit less intuitive in that. In the screen number 1, the product KPI is app download rate, whereas in the number 2, the KPI is conversion rate. So here you could see how fundamentally different two interfaces could be just by changing the definition of success. So considering the importance of this, let's go through what, in my experience, is the 3-step process that any organization should go through to define it. And also, depending on your role in the organization, you may be able to recognize what you do in one or more of those steps. So this process starts by end goal definition at the highest level. You should be able to borrow this directly from your leadership team, but in case that's not clear to you or is not well defined, let me propose a generic end goal definition, which is customer-centric, which I hope is suitable for most of the companies and products represented here. So the goal of a company is to have as many customers who are as loyal as possible. This is an intuitive definition of a well-researched concept called customer equity. I promise this is the only formula you'll see in this deck, so please bear with me. Here, you can see that customer equity is represented as the sum of the lifetime values of all the customers, where N is the number of customers and CLV is lifetime value, knowing that lifetime value indicates the total profit you can expect from a single customer. Please keep this definition in mind because it could be one of the most important drivers of your company's success. In fact, very similar models are being used by investors to estimate the value of any company. Calculating it could entail very sophisticated models though. But don't worry, even understanding directionally what it means could help you study. Now we have a good way to define success for the reasons I just mentioned, but with a big minus. The feedback cycle is too long, since once you make a change, you may need to wait for months, if not years, to get to know the actual impact on customer equity, which makes the product improvement process virtually unfeasible. Based on this, the next challenge is to find a way to measure success for product that gets the best of customer equity but that mitigates the big downside related to the long cycle. To get to do so, let's have a look at the customer equity formula on top of your screen. Since in there, we could see that there are only two factors that matter: N, number of customers, and CLV, a lifetime value. So let's try to understand these two factors better. As product people, we should start by asking questions such as what leads a customer to use your product, to find ways to bring customers in, which is represented with the yellow arrow. And we should also ask what leads a customer to become loyal to your product and to purchase again and again, which is represented with the circle of arrows. Please keep these symbols in mind because I'll use them later in this presentation. The good news is that those questions don't need to be answered all at once, which is why we need to focus, the step 2. There are multiple factors to consider in the focus definition, such as the strategy of your company, the situation of the market, the maturity of your product, etc. The main objective here, at least in the context of this talk, is to define which stage of the customer journey you'll have to direct your attention to. In other words, this step is about answering the question, do you need to focus on attracting more customers or on keeping them loyal? Just to be clear, in general, it's unlikely that your company will only focus on one of them, but it's quite likely that you as PM will have to. So, to make this focus conversation more real, let's come back to the example I gave at the beginning of this talk. Remember, we talked about the big change in the Fever interface between 2015 and now? There, we spoke about Fever redefining success because in 2015, it was app download rate, whereas now it's conversion rate. So why do you think Fever made such a change? Considering that acquiring new customers has been quite important in 2015 as it is now. Well, in my opinion, this change has been rather a correction. In 2015, the KPI was app downloads, which is in this context a loyalty KPI, in which, in general, gets in the way of acquiring new customers, right? Because they need to download the app to begin with, and then that could be already a big friction point if you want to acquire those customers. And this correction could be seen in the current version of Fever in your right-hand side, where the KPI conversion is in line with the customer acquisition focus that the company has. I hope that the example is clear. And in case you'd like to know more in detail how to define your focus, there are even mathematical models to do so. So if you're interested, I can paste some reference material in the comments. Now let's move to the next step related to KPI definition. This is a fundamental step when defining success at product squad level. And let me start this by telling you that I have good and bad news for you. So the bad news is that there are no recipes to choose your KPI. But the good news is that there are some guidelines and considerations that could help us in the process. So to make it more real, let me use the case of Booking.com and Fever. Two examples I know quite well, and they could be used together because both of them are in the B2C online leisure space. But I hope this exercise is relevant to most of you. And this starts by the question, how could Booking.com and Fever increase their number of customers? Well, they should either make sure that one, more people visit their platform, or two, that they convert them into customers, or both, right? Examples of KPIs reflecting the point one about visits is actually number of visits itself, which is already a KPI, but there are also drivers for it, such as number of referrals, number of people sharing when you make a viral product, net promoter score, or NPS, which is a way to measure customer satisfaction by asking them how likely they are to recommend you, etc. Whereas, when it comes to increasing conversions, we have the conversion rate as a KPI, which indicates your capacity to transform visitors into customers, or any micro-conversion value, reflecting the rate of people going from point A to point B in your journey. So now, let's go to the next question to continue with the example of Fever in Booking. How could they increase the lifetime value of their customers? Similarly to the previous slide, they have two options. They either increase one repetition, which indicates how many times a customer makes a purchase, or two, increase some metric related to revenue per order. Examples of KPIs related to repetition are conversion rate, rating, and NPS, which give us some indication of how much the customer liked the experience, which we would expect to be correlated to that repetition, because if you liked it, you'll probably come back, right? And then app downloads, etc. And two, when it comes to increasing revenue per order, we have basket size related to the number of items a customer buys in a single purchase, order value related to the latter, but also to the price of each item, etc. So, in the last two slides, we've discussed more in detail what those 4 families of KPIs are about, at least for the cases of Booking.com and Fear. Now, in the following slides, we'll discuss some principles and guidelines I have used in the past to help selecting a good KPI. Here there are some of them. 1, start by asking whether increasing a KPI would help your customer. Right? This could translate into you, for instance, spending less time in metrics such as revenue per order or related to that, because this metric could lead you to solve problems which are rather companies' problems. Not always though, but just a word of advice, or just to be careful with that metric, right? Then 2, understand trade-offs and correlations. You may want to know, for instance, how many referrals do you need for you to have 1 extra purchase? Or how does downloading the app impact your frequency of purchases? Or even, what is more correlated to the number of visits? Is it the number of people sharing your app, or the NPS score, etc.? So why do you want to know this? First, to break ties in some situations when you don't know, or when you have 2 metrics pointing in different directions, for instance. And second, because it may help you choosing the best KPI for a given problem by looking at correlations, assuming you're also able to establish that causality. 3, for experimentation, aim for binary KPIs as much as you can, of course. It's not always possible. When I say binary, think of yes or no questions. Did it happen or not? Because it could save you a lot of time when it comes to reach statistical significance in an experiment, for instance, and also forces you to understand the problem better. For instance, if you want to reduce, say, page load time, because we know it affects customer experience. The longer a page takes to load, the worse experience. Don't aim to reduce the average load time, but aim to keep it under certain threshold based on when the biggest drop-off happens, which means your KPI will be defined by the question, did the user exceed the load time threshold or not? Cool. Apart from this principle, I have the last 2 tips before closing. 1, make sure your KPI is measuring the right effect, meaning that if it goes up or down, it's because an actual change of customers' behavior and nothing else. For instance, I remember a funny, not funny situation related to this when looking at the NPS, or Net Promoter Score. So at some point, we saw that the NPS decreased sharply, which triggered the alarms, as you could see in the chart below. There were people looking at comments, reviews from users, trying to pinpoint where the problem was. And guess what? There was no problem with the actual customer satisfaction, but what caused the drop was the very position of the questionnaire in the page. Here you can see a simplified view of what I'm telling you. The main hypothesis for this was that the questionnaire was seen by less people, and that these people that saw it wasn't random, but users that scrolled down looking for something that wasn't clear up front, hence the drop. By the way, I'm not advocating against using NPS as a KPI. I'm only saying, if you do so, please make sure you control for external variations. And last but not least, when selecting a KPI, keep in mind that it should be 1, aligned with the end goal, customer equity in our example. 2, it should be timely, meaning that we should be able to see an impact shortly after the change has been made. Remember that this is one of the main reasons why customer equity is not a good product KPI. And 3, should trigger action, in the sense that you should not be doing the same thing if your KPI is doing well than if it wasn't. So let's recap to make sure my main points are also your main takeaways. First and foremost, don't forget, your measurement of success shapes your product more than any feature you'll ever ship. And secondly, we talked about what, in my experience, are the 3 steps to properly define success in your product. Step 1, related to the end goal definition of your company, where we introduced the concept of customer equity. Step 2, where we discussed about focus and deciding between bringing customers in versus keeping them loyal. And step 3, where we used the case of Booking.com and Fiverr to discuss KPIs, plus some guidelines and tips on how to define them. So just to wrap up, please remember that you as PM are expected to have an impact in at least 2 levels. 1, of course, the product you manage, and 2, and probably more importantly, the way you define success. Because if you don't make the effort and don't define success, you are setting yourself up for failure. Thank you very much. Over to Anya.
Thanks, Sebastian. That was very enlightening. I guess now we can go over to questions, and Alex is taking over from here. So over from Hamburg to Barcelona.
Hi, also very warm welcome from my side, and hello to a lot of old friends back in Hamburg, and a lot of new friends here in Barcelona. We have a couple of minutes, and we already got some questions. Feel free on YouTube to put in your questions if you have more questions to the speakers. I would start with the first one, going to Nacho, and I tried, at least with the first questions, trying to compare to connect your talks a bit. So you need to think a bit out of the box. Let's see how that works. So Nacho, first question to you. How could a great strategy, and you explained a bit on how to get to a great strategy, help you choosing between the 2 KPIs Sebastian was talking about, like acquiring more customers or retaining the existing customers? How would you tackle that problem with strategy?
Yeah, so I think that the not only strategy will help you decide on that. You need to consider as I said, the vision you want to achieve, and the strategy is a means to achieve that vision. So, for instance, if you have the ambition to expand internationally, your strategy or your insights will give you some ways on how you can expand and get more customers, and you will focus on that area. And instead, if you're trying to add more value or retain more customers, you will probably get insights for the other KPIs. So I think that the strategy will not be the only tool to choose one of those. But given the direction you want to take, with a proper strategy, you can have insights on how to make that decision successful.
Cool, thank you. Next question to Thomas. You were showing some tools of how to experiment without code, and I'm personally a big fan of that. But how do you make sure that the learnings you're making with those experiments, that they're transferable and adaptable to real world problems? And in the end, you said that a normal PM in a big company not coming up with something startup-y should be able to use them. So maybe you can give a bit more insight into that and how you would take the learnings and incorporate them into a strategy, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And actually, I'm glad that Nacho went before me, so I can answer this question while piggybacking off something that he shared, which is the opportunity solution tree, for example, right? So I think if you look into, you always want to make sure that you do experiments that connect to something you care about, right? An outcome. And I think, for example, the opportunity solution trees is a great example to then go step back and say, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve here? How can we do different things to influence towards driving that outcome? And then usually at some point you make the switch and say, okay, let's try and experiment with it. And I think at that point it's exactly where you could come in and say, well, are we on the outcome? Is it a customer related problem? Then maybe we should do an interview, or maybe with a click prototype. Is it a revenue problem? Then maybe we want to do like a feature stub, or we want to do some other form of experimentation. And then you can actually run these experiments to help you understand these opportunities and to weigh them, and then they're directly into your strategy. So they're basically, I would say, there are ways and a mean to answer opportunities that you're exploring while trying to move an outcome. That's, I think, how you can incorporate them. And I'd actually argue that that's something that everybody is involved with, right? So even from a business perspective, but often I would say like in bigger companies, you maybe find something, you think there might be a problem there. So yes, obviously you could jump to the solution to build a new feature to solve that. But in that actual step, I would say, okay, let's try to maybe pull in the opportunity solution tree. Big fan of that. Map it out and then see, okay, what are now the experiments that we need to run to answer which hypotheses, and then some of them hopefully you can answer with some of the no-code tools. Yeah.
Cool. So building strategy baked by learnings from real experiments. I love it.
Exactly.
Cool. Question to you, Sebastian. You talked about acquisition, retention. Now the challenging part, how would you experiment your way into deciding which one to follow without writing one line of code?
I would say just by using Excel, you could calculate the marginal cost of acquiring a customer versus the marginal cost of just keeping the same customer loyal, and then you compare both costs. So it's just doing math work, just doing Excel work.
Cool.
That would be the short question. Of course, you could complicate it by creating segments and stuff, but that would at least do the job.
Nice. Thank you. Thomas, another question from the audience to you. Any suggestions or insights on how much time you should allocate for product managers for doing these kind of no-code experiments?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I actually have two answers to that. One is a bit of a personal one, and the other one is the more politically correct one, if I do say so. So the more personal one is, if you're a if you're a passionate product manager, you want to try them out. So maybe you will try them out not only during your job hours, but also in your free time, just when you try to put up something, right? Maybe you have like a side project like PM library or something else, or you're organizing a ProductTank, and then you can incorporate those. Or I don't know, private example, you can plan your wedding in Airtable. And you can learn about that, right? So applying that. And then I think the other one, the more if you say like I want to keep my product work to the working hours, I would say use them. Try to learn from them. For example, you could start by signing up to the Product Hunt daily newsletter, and you get like the top 5 new ones that are coming up. A lot of them are no-code tools, not all of them, but a lot of them. So you can sort of keep a finger on the pulse, learn new things, and I always share new stuff with my colleagues, and then sometimes we go off and find something interesting. So we are aware of them, that's one, and then you know them sort of in your back of your head, and then when the opportunity arises, you can plug them into your work. And actually, I think there's actually a slide that I didn't show. It was in the previous version of the talk. You can also use no-code tools to help you run experiments, not only to actually build something that you want to experiment with, but you can also use a lot of no-code tools to help you automate some other stuff. For example, you can combine no-code tools to actually automate the user research recruitment for user interviews, right? So you could, for example, set up something. If you have good tracking, you could say people who went to this part here and maybe they're logged into the product, sent them and have a trigger, sent them an invitation with a time slot, like Calendly thing, where they can do user interviews, right? And then you could target it on the people that you're thinking are interested in that, and then you don't need to go and dig some data up. That actually comes to you, and you have automated that. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can plug those in.
Cool. Thanks so much. Very, very insightful. Let's go back to strategy. Nacho, could you give us a bit more insight into the process itself? You talked a lot on how you would build that strategy, but how often would you do that? Like, how often do you revisit the current strategy? Like, how would that fit, for example, to an OKR process? Can you talk a bit more into like you do it on a monthly basis or you do it daily to reassure, like just a bit more insight there?
Yeah, so I think that we want to set the strategy for a longer term, so probably want to look into a 12-month spectrum or 18 months, whatever. But you actually, as I said, we cannot rely on a waterfall process in which we set the strategy once and we forget. So you are constantly reviewing it. And how you review it, I think you have many steps in the process. The first one will be when you start doing discovery work. So I said that some discovery work will be put into the strategy selection. But then you will start experimenting with those ideas you want to pursue, and you will get more insights that you can get back to the strategy. So I think that will happen probably a month or so about when you start executing the strategy. And then the OKRs, I think, are a very great tool to check that you are actually making progress towards what you decided. So during the selection step that was skipped, you will set goals that will let you know if you are actually achieving what you said you want to achieve. So with the OKRs, you will have a partial view each quarter if you are going in the right direction. And as soon as you have some poor results, you should raise the flag and probably do the process again or change course and pivot to a new strategy.
Cool. Sounds interesting. And in a perfect world, you wouldn't need to tell your management that this is a good idea, building a good strategy. But let's talk about the cases where you actually need to do some work to get them on your side. Like, do you have any suggestions for normal PMs out there on how to pitch their strategy to C-level or management?
Yeah, I think that the first advice I will give is that your key stakeholders should be part of the process. So, for instance, when I describe in more detail the insights process, I actually suggest a session in which you put your key stakeholders together, not only because you want to keep them involved, because they are probably very, very intelligent people that can bring really useful insights to the table. So I think that it's not only kind of, I will tell you what my strategy is, but let's come together and define it together. Also involving other departments like marketing. You will not just go and tell them, hey, this is a product we are building, let's go market it. You want to bring them to the table and see what they can add to that strategy. So that being said, I think that a great way to kind of making sure that everyone is involved is that you get everyone's opinion. Probably the same that you do in every product work. For instance, organizing the backlog, you make sure that you understand the insights from everyone. And when you need to say no to someone, you have the arguments and you have the right reasons to tell them no about something they want to pursue. So in a strategy is similar, you will get their insight, you will kind of decide which direction you want to make, and then going back and tell them exactly why this direction is important and why maybe something they were promoting is not useful at this moment and you will consider it later. So I think that's probably something similar of any stakeholder management we do in a day-to-day basis.
And just to add to that, I think that's a really good question. And just to expand on that, I think if you're talking with them and you're communicating and you're trying to understand their point, I think you can then also, I would add another good thing that you can help sell your strategy, if you say so, if you want to say so, is that you make sure how what you are doing connects to what they care about, so that you actually make the connection between what your hippos and CEOs actually want to move, and you show, okay, if we're going down that path, or that if you follow that product strategy that is laying out here, you'll actually profit from it as well by X, Y, Z. But that requires basically first knowing about what they care about in this communication, trying to understand that what's the number that they are tasked with moving, what are their restrictions, what does their daily life look like, and then doing sort of the abstracting work and saying, okay, what I have here for that person, that relates to this like this, or that part relates to marketing like this part relates to biz stuff like this, and then I think that makes it not so much a sell anymore as more of like a, you see, that makes sense for all of us.
Nice. Thanks for like getting two different views also on. It's nice to get the conversation going. I think we have time for one last question to Sebastian. So again, coming back to acquisition versus retention, and my question would be, what do you think? Like, if you focus very hard on one of the two, and you showed the two different examples, like, do you think the other KPI automatically suffers if you focus on one? And if that's the case, what would you suggest to our audience on how to make sure that we're like not building in one direction too much?
Very good question. I would make the difference between the realm of development, right, where in the customer journey you're developing, and what you're measuring. Because that if you are measuring in the upper funnel, right, in the acquisition, doesn't mean that you're only going to develop in an acquisition. It also could mean that you're also going to build an awesome product that will bring more customers in, and that has many virality tools implemented within it, right? So it definitely doesn't mean at all that. And I mean, it could mean that if you kind of go in that direction, but I guess by design you will try to solve multiple problems at once, but knowing that the primary focus is acquiring more customers.
Cool.
Just a tiny addition to that, because I think it's a funny coincidence that we had two people from the travel industry, which I perceive to be as more like one-time purchases things, and the Zone is in the subscription business, right? So every month people can cancel, and some have in the last couple of weeks, which is probably not a surprise. But I would actually say, like, I think this balance also depends a lot about what your product is, right? So if you're in a more one-time sale thing, probably you can lean a bit more on the acquisition side. Obviously, a customer who already knows your brand is much easier to reacquire. But I would say if you're like in a subscription world, retention is usually where the money is, and then it also retention basically then drives everything and helps you move things forward.
Also, it would depend. For instance, if you want to acquire more customers or if you want to have more customers being loyal, you could a bit change your product, right, or the item. In the travel industry, for instance, you could also promote loyalty by having, for instance, experiences, or by offering things in your hometown, etc. Right. So, of course, by definition, travel industry is a one-time thing, but you could make it so it's not.
It's super interesting. Also working in a subscription business,
Yeah.
we actually split the teams. Like we have 3 teams working on those membership parts, and we split it in cross-sell, upgrade, and retention. And like we're going in all directions kind of at the same time, but we need to talk and discuss on a daily basis to make that work. So yeah, thanks for all the input. We almost made it to 90 minutes sharp. So thanks to everyone who stayed until now. Thanks for Guido. Thanks to Guido, who was kind of in the background, managing every little aspect of that talk. So maybe why not bring everyone back to the forefront so we can say goodbye together. So thank you very much for joining. I hope to see you soon, either in Barcelona or in Hamburg. That's Guido, by the way. Hi. Hopefully in person, because the most important stuff which we will miss this time is like the connection and talking to people after the talks, which I will miss today. But yeah, we will do it in the future. And therefore, thanks and have a great week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.